It is never too late to try something new. It is never too late to live your dream life or to start all over. I learned that a long time ago, and it was reinforced by my conversation with the incredible, inspirational artist Lisa Congdon, who is our guest for today. Welcome to Choose the Bear. I am Kat Calvin, and today we are talking to an artist and a writer who is living a bright and colorful and inspirational life. We talk about what it's like to make a living as an artist. We talk about why you can start over and some of the incredible women who she spoke to for her book all about being a woman, starting something new at any age. And we talk about art and life and all sorts of things. It's a really wonderful conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, of course, to subscribe, like, follow, all the things, the links, and share this with someone who maybe this January, as we're still deep into the new year, is maybe thinking that this is their year to try something new. And yeah, here we go. Hello, everyone. We're back to Choose the Bear. I'm so excited. I am here with the brilliant, creative, inspirational, marvelous Lisa Congdon. I'm author of a lot of books, but these two books are so gorgeous. I mean, look, can you tell she's an artist? Can you tell? Look at this one. My little boring book back here is sad because it doesn't look like this. And then, oh my God, illustrations inside are so beautiful. We're going to go in, but Lisa, before we start, actually, I have beef with you. We have beef.
Okay.
This book.
Bring it on.
It's called A Glorious Freedom. Older women living extraordinary lives. Sounds good, right? Until you open it up. The book you are holding in your hands is a book about women. It is a book about women over the age of 40 who are thriving. Lisa, I am not older. That is the rudest thing. Anyway, I had to put this book down and walk away.
Well, it's so interesting that you bring that up because the other day, I wrote that book a long time ago. And almost 10 years ago, if not 10 years ago. And at the time I was in I'm 57 now. So I was probably around 46 or 47. When you're in your 40s, you feel like you're entering this new phase of life. But when you're in your 50s, you're like, oh, people in their 40s are young. They're babies.
Yes, I know.
So I had a moment where I was like, wow, over 40? Really? It should have been over 50, but whatever. I guess I wouldn't have been qualified to write it then.
Like, I'm canceling the interview. Once I got over that, it was an incredible book.
Well, thank you.
It still hurts. It still hurts. But let's start, now that we've gone through our beef. Just tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Lisa Congdon. I am an artist in many ways. I mostly identify as an illustrator, which means I make art that goes on things. Sometimes book covers, sometimes inside of books, both my own books and books that I illustrate for other people. Everything from advertising to packaging to products and beyond. Brand collaborations, that kind of thing. So basically I draw for a living, mostly for clients and also for myself. So I have a retail shop where I sell my own things like prints and posters and tote bags and stickers and things like that. And I do a little bit of mentoring and coaching of emerging artists and creative entrepreneurs, do some public speaking, and I have a fine art practice, which means every couple of years I'll put aside everything else and work for about 6 months on a body of work that goes into a gallery or a museum. And then it's over and I go back to real life. So yeah, that's mostly what I do. And then of course I do a bit of writing too. So I've written a couple of books for artists and then a handful of other books for just regular folks. Yeah.
See, this is why I love asking people to describe themselves, because that was That was such a plethora of just wonderful things that I would have missed 12 of them if I had just read your bio. That's incredible.
Thanks.
So I love this book. And one of the reasons I was going through it is like, oh, she's written so many books, and like, which ones are we going to talk about? And what are we going to talk about? And I felt that this book really, and I'm talking about A Glorious Freedom, it encapsulated so much of what sort of this podcast and the mission of the podcast is about, which is, women recognizing that they can live whole, full, joyful lives within themselves, regardless of their relationship or parenting status. And I think another layer is that is also regardless of age.
Mhm.
So I want to talk a bit about that, but let's start with your story, because you got into your line of work, into art and being an artist at a later age. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so my career started out, I was, I had a few odd jobs after college and then was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Of course, I got a liberal arts degree, and as many people who just study, books and things like that, I'm like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? So I took some time to figure that out and was like, I think I want to be a teacher. So and this was in the early 90s. There's so many options now available to women that weren't necessarily available then, or as, of course you could go to medical school and be a doctor or go to law school and be a lawyer, but like now, there are so many career paths that are open to women. And even in the early 90s, I think it was much more limited. And so naturally I was like, I'm going to be a teacher, because that's one thing, that a career path that was really felt creative to me. And I didn't necessarily even identify as a creative person when I was 23, which is a whole other story. But I was like, this is something I can do. I can go to school for, and within 2 years, I can go into the workforce. So I went to a graduate program, studied to be an elementary school teacher. And that was a really kind of amazing time for me, because I went into a program that was run specifically, it was one of the first of its kind. It was run for people who were really interested in working in diverse populations. I lived in San Francisco. I ended up getting a job in San Francisco Unified School District. The program heavily emphasized equity and inclusion. I learned all about, um, you know, my own biases and privilege and things that I had never even thought about in my life. And that was a real gift. And I went in to teach at couple different public schools for about 10 years. And then about 10 years in, the school where I was working got a huge grant this was during the Clinton years, and there was a lot of money pouring into education, and we got a huge grant from this intermediary organization that had received a lot of money from the government for school improvement. And so we got this huge grant, and I was chosen by the principal of my school to lead that effort. And so I became, I sort of removed myself from the classroom and started doing some more administrative work in the school and leading the change effort in the school. And within 2 years, the organization that granted us the money poached me from that school and hired me to come work for them. So then I took on more school change work, work to close the achievement gap between white kids and their black and brown kids who were black and brown who were not achieving as well, and really doing a lot of work with teachers on changing their practice to serve all children. And so I did that work for a number of years and rose into a leadership position at the school. I'm sorry, at the nonprofit, and still working with schools. And it's somewhere in there. I noticed that there was a real dearth of creativity in my life. Like, I never identified it as an artist, but I, as a teacher, like, always had this sort of constant stream of creative energy, in terms of the activities I was doing with the kids and the ways that I chose to teach and the things that I chose to teach. And I felt like that was really missing. And so I decided in my free time outside of work that I would start taking some art classes and kind of explore um, my own creativity. And that led me to where I am today. That sort of like simple, I just want more creativity in my life. I had no aspirations to become a professional artist, zero idea that it was even possible. And actually, what's possible today wasn't possible when I started out because the internet didn't exist in the way that it does now. Um, and I just sort of mucked around, took a lot of classes, got really into sewing for a long time and thought maybe I was going to be somebody who made sewing patterns and, or home decor things. I got really into photography. I apprenticed for a photographer for a period of time. Um, but ultimately just settled on drawing and painting and collage. And I'm self-taught, never went to school, but started sharing a lot of the things I was making on the we didn't call them social media at the time, but like I had a blog, and so I was like sharing my projects there and on the very old photo platform called Flickr, which if you're of a certain age, you might not remember. I made a lot of friends there who I still have today. And then, eventually, joined all the other places that I share my work now. And what that early phase, and that was in the early 2000s. So the internet was sort of becoming a space for creative people to share their work, and the DIY movement was kind of, burgeoning at that time. And, you had websites all about how to do things yourself and how to sew and how to paint. And there were starting to be platforms about, all of those things. And the internet became this really amazing resource for creative people. And I was definitely taking advantage of that at the time and also starting to share myself. And eventually I left the nonprofit where I had been working and decided to go out on my own. And that was in 2007. And it was a really tricky time because I was making very little money. I had at that point bought my own apartment in San Francisco. And so I had a stable living situation. And it was really just about paying my, at the time, very low mortgage. This was before San Francisco got horribly expensive.
Yes.
And I had a vision, and I was like, even though I sort of became a professional artist on accident in a way, like I discovered it through, just being part of a community of people who loved to make things. I was determined that I was going to figure out how to do it and be successful at it. My parents, even though at the time I was in my late 30s, they were like, really dubious about my ability to make a living as an artist. Like there were no pictures for what that could look like unless you were sort of like some big deal in the fine art community or you were a big deal illustrator, you know. And I remember at the time I was making really good money at this nonprofit, and they were like, how they just couldn't understand why I was doing what I was doing and how I was going to make ends meet. And I made it my mission to prove to my parents, even in my late 30s, when I probably shouldn't care too much about their opinion, but I did, and I wanted to prove to them that I could do it. And so I did, and I kind of worked on the craft of like being an artist in all the ways, improving my technical skill, getting better, finding my voice, um, understanding the business of art, and really using the internet and social media, which at the time was new, to grow my audience and try to sell work. And, ended up signing with an agent, and the rest is history. So, that was a long time ago, and a lot's happened since then, but that's sort of the long, short version of how it happened.
And I think that, right now, I just wrote a Substack piece recently called It's Supposed to Be Hard, because social media has really ruined what Gen Z thinks and the younger millennials think your 20s are supposed to look like, right?
Hmm.
you're not in your 20s supposed to be traveling the world and living in a fabulous apartment. You're supposed to be doing what we've all been doing, which is being broke, knowing every happy hour deal with your friends, living with roommates, right? Doing jobs you maybe are in your career path, maybe not, but all of them are terrible, right? Because that's how you learn and you struggle and you grow and whatever. And, I was 32 before I ended up on this career path and like found the thing that was my actual calling. You in your 30s. And I think there's this real perception that like at 22 out the gate, I should have everything. And one of the things that I loved, and then of course, you're going to be dead at 50. And so like, my God, if
Yeah,
I
you're
haven't
so
made
old
it,
when you're 50.
if haven't made it by 31, then I'm lost, right? And yeah, in this book, you have just example after example after example of women who were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Literally, I love these little like beautiful sections where you just have like all of these different women in creative areas, in sports and different areas that published their first book at 83, or were 40, like Leslie Jones was 47 when she got on SNL, right? And those examples are so important. How do you think that or what do you think that these young people in their even teens who are looking and seeing where they think they're supposed to be, and 20s can learn from all of these examples about what life actually looks like versus what they think it's supposed to look like?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to what you mentioned already, which is this idea that we should have it figured out when we're in our 20s, I think that's compounded by this sense of needing immediacy in other ways, like I should have the immediate answer to every question because I can go to Google and search for the answer to, like, when we were growing up, we didn't have that. Like if you wanted
Yeah.
to know something, you had to like go to the library or, maybe
Or the
ask a parent
encyclopedia. We had the
or an
Encyclopedia
encyclopedia.
Britannica that was like 85 books and you had to
Yeah,
look
yeah.
through.
And almost every family had one. And if you didn't, you
Yep.
had to go to the encyclopedia at the library or at school.
Yep.
And I do think that like Gen Xers and older millennials sort of remember, and obviously the generations before us remember, you know, the toil involved in just sort of like figuring stuff out. And so I do think there's a certain impatience inherent in a lot of the sort of minds and spirits of younger people. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I think it's they're sort of a victim um, of the time, right? And they say AI is like killing our souls. And, the next
Yes.
generation is going to then have even less curiosity or ability to just sort of sit with questions because they have, again, even more immediate answers and or information. Um, and so I think what I mean, in some ways I wasn't too different than a lot of younger folks now in terms of thinking like I'm going to choose a thing to do and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life and I should figure out what that is pretty quickly. Um, and when I became a classroom teacher, for example, when I was in my 20s, I chose that career, as I mentioned earlier, because it was something that was really easy for me to move into. And it seemed like a career path that I could have until I retired. And I never really gave much thought to, like, do I actually like children? Which, by the way, I do. But, like, or like, is this something that I even want to do? I just chose it and decided I was going to do it. And it led to a lot of other amazing things. But what's interesting is, I was only a classroom teacher for about 7 or 8 years. And before I was even hit my decade mark of being a teacher, I went off to work at a nonprofit. Did I know that was going to happen? No. And I could have stayed in that nonprofit or in this sort of world of not for profit sort of education um, until I retired, but that didn't feel like what I really wanted to do because once I discovered art, I was like really called to that. And then I had to sort of turn around and say, okay, I'm going to say goodbye to this thing and I'm going to adopt this new thing. And then, I went in the direction of becoming an artist and giving up a lot of financial security to do that temporarily, of course. And then now even my art career has looked many different ways since I started almost 20 years ago. And so I think that's one important thing for people who are younger to know is that what you do can and will change, and staying open to those possibilities is really what's going to make your life rich and help you to feel satisfied. And that it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to make a pivot, even when you're in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. In fact, like it's actually kind of cool and exciting that that can happen at that age, because as we get older, we develop so many skills and competencies that are sort of invisible even to us, but that are so useful. Like when I made that pivot in my late 30s from, education, nonprofit to art world, um, in my sort of uneducated brain at the time, I was like, I'm leaving behind all of these skills and all of these sort of personal skills that I've learned and developed in working for this organization and working with people and coaching people and being a teacher and all of those things. I'm going to leave those things behind to go sit at a desk and draw pictures all day. And I learned very quickly that being an artist or running a business requires, um, you know, negotiation. It requires boundaries. It requires being organized. It requires networking. It requires really graceful communication. Like all of these things that I had learned in my job as a project manager at a nonprofit, and even in my role as a teacher in an elementary school, um, were really transferable. And I didn't realize that. And I think that actually, as an older woman, older being in my late 30s to start a new career, was so to my benefit, right? Like that I was able to take all of these things that I had learned in previous careers and apply them to my new career. And everything you do is, if you're a young person and you're in a career path and you end up changing your mind about what you want to do, or you move into something else, everything you're doing now is going to transfer. Maybe not everything, but a lot of things will.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful thing. And you're not going to lose, you're only going to bring those things to something new. And that's something I had to learn, and something that I remind people who, like a lot of women come to me and they say, I'm 53, I want to be a full-time artist, but I'm scared. I have imposter syndrome, all of these things. And what I like to remind women in middle age is that you have more talent, more skill, more wisdom than most of the population, not less. And so I think, we're raised to feel like we're kind of like in a deficit all of the time, especially the older we get, the more of a deficit we have. And it's actually the opposite. So, I think it's owning and embracing those things throughout your life as you get older, like that will, I don't know, um, enrich your whatever trajectory you're on, and make you better at whatever it is you choose to do.
Yeah. I've never understood imposter syndrome because I've met men and I just like and I always just tell every woman I know, you've met men before. How do you not know that you're brilliant and extraordinary and capable of anything? I literally cannot. I've even like read the original study and have listened to interviews with the women who came up with the term imposter syndrome, which we're all using wrong, by the way, because I was like, I cannot understand it at
Yeah.
all that any woman would ever have. And it's like, unless you are at NASA and you lied on your resume, then like there is no reason. Even then, you could probably figure it out. I mean, men do it. It can't be that hard. Like you like I don't get it. But I love that you said, and we're gonna switch to older, those of us geriatric women, in a sec. But to close out that loop, I'm when I mentor young people in nonprofits all the time, and they sort of do the same thing where they're like, well, how do you know how to do this or that or whatever? And I was like, look, I've had a lot of jobs before I started this, and every job, every internship, like that all adds up. And that's the experience that takes, it also tells you what you like and what you don't like, and like
Yep.
helps
So important.
guide
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Yes. So it's critical. But then on the other side, one of the things I love about this book is that, my friends and I are mostly in our 40s, 50s, maybe late 30s, and we're all starting new things. I just started golfing this summer. I have a friend who is like just starting hiking, or we're trying new career paths or new things. And it's fun, but you do also think, like, ugh, I could never, like, can I write a book? Like, didn't everybody publish their first book at 12? And then you look and you're like, no, actually, you're usually in your 40s or 50s. I was a month before my book came out, the month before my 40th birthday, right? And like, I loved looking at this. And even, what I loved too is women who started physical and athletic pursuits in older age. You've got women in here who didn't start running marathons till they were in their 70s. And like that reminder that, oh yeah, I have, my aunt is actually retiring from teaching, I think this year, and she's 60. And so now she's like, well, and my grandmother's 94. So she's like, well, what am I going to do for the next 35 years? Right. And like she gets to reinvent herself at 60 with the benefits now of this, it's teacher retirement. So, it's gas money, but like, we never will reach, if we don't want to, a point in our lives when we get to reinvent ourselves. I already know what job I want at 80, like my retirement
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah, totally.
And so I love that. What are you hoping that the older women over 40 get out of this book and this message when they see it?
Well, I want to add too, before I answer that question, I'm a competitive cyclist and I didn't get into that at all until I was in my 50s. So
Oh,
I'm an
awesome.
example of also being a much later bloomer to, or a later starter to athletic. I mean, I've always been an athletic person, but never really trained or pursued something in this way. And it's so interesting. Women my age in their 50s and 60s are actually like really amazing cyclists because they have more time and energy, because their kids are gone or whatever, to train and to really pour themselves into a sport. They might not be doing it at an elite professional level, but there is something about like middle age rage that gets poured into some new athletic endeavor, or like type 2 fun, which is what the term a lot of endurance athletes use for doing like really long running or cycling races. um I mean, that book was super personal to me, I think, because I was an example of somebody who started, quote, late. I didn't actually hit my stride with a lot of things in my life from, I didn't get married till I was 45. I didn't start my art career until I was nearly 40. I didn't, at the time, I hadn't even kind of become the cyclist that I am today. I didn't start that until I was in my 50s. And that, I think there was this moment where I pivoted from, for me, a certain degree of imposter syndrome, especially like in a career path where most people are coming out of art school and kind of like, the hot shot young, who's 30 under 30, and like all those kids who are like the young guns and getting these awards for being super young and super creative. And I was a contemporary of those kids in a way, but I was like, 20 years older than they were when I really got going in my illustration and design career. So I had a certain amount of like, who am I and what am I doing here, compared to all of these kids. I mean, of course, I 100% turned that around eventually. But that was something that I grappled with a lot. And once I sort of like got over that hill of like, oh no, actually, work I do is just as good, and I have just as much to bring to the table, even though I'm 20 years older. Once I embraced that, like actually everything became almost electric in my life. Like my career took off. My creative work got better. There's something about sort of like true confidence, or sort of like sitting in your own power, that is so um, uh, like important for doing creative work or having momentum in your life. And I I wanted to share the magic of that with people. And I wanted to celebrate other women in particular who had figured stuff out later in life, that it is really possible to change and grow and do new things and make a mark on the world, in a different way or, at all, at a later age. And because it was something that was happening for me, I was super excited about it. I felt a lot of gratitude for the fact that it had happened. And um, so that was sort of the impetus for the book. And I wanted to share that inspiration with other people because so much of what I was hearing in my public speaking and in my, sort of day-to-day life when I would tell my story was, well, that's true for you, but it wouldn't necessarily be true for me. And I think as women in particular, we tend to sort of downplay what we think we can do or accomplish. And at some point I just realized that was total bullshit and that, being in my own creative power and my own physical power was only going to serve me. And that I wanted to spread that message to other people.
Well, I'm obsessed. I love this book. I'm buying this for all of my friends 35 and above.
Thank
They're
you.
all getting a copy. I was reading and I was like, everybody I know needs this. But I also want to talk about, I'm so obsessed with this cover. I just, it's so great.
Thank you.
I want to talk about this book, Finding Your Artistic Voice. I mean, if you're an artist and watching this, then obviously you've met your mentor. This is great. But when I was reading it as a person with, look, I do some crafting. I can crochet a basket. I'm taking a sewing class soon, but I can't even draw a stick figure, right? And I was like, I'm not an artist, but I there was so much in here that very much spoke to me as an activist and a writer and other things. And I realized like this is about finding your voice in a way that goes well beyond just art. So can you talk a little bit though, just to start off, sort of about the book and about sort of just finding your artistic voice in general and sort of what that means to you?
Yeah, so that book, I used to have a blog and I made a blog post. Like I had done a survey on Instagram and asked my following, what is it you want to learn from me? And at the time, I was really sort of becoming known for somebody who had a very distinct artistic voice. Like my work was becoming recognizable. And I think that's a lot of things that that's one thing that a lot of artists struggle with is how to have a cohesive voice and make cohesive bodies of work. And so I decided to do, and that was one thing that a lot of my audience wanted to know more about, like how to do that. And so I was like, I'm going to write a blog post about this. I'm going to try to unpack it. And I mean, I think it was maybe 500 words. Like it was pretty like bare bones, like here are 10 steps to trying to, to finding your voice as an artist. And my editor at Chronicle, and I had worked with her on other books, including A Glorious Freedom, wrote to me and was like, I know this is just a blog post, but I think it needs to be a book. There's no other real book on this topic for artists right now. And I think you have a story to tell. And so she said, if you're interested, just, write a book proposal. And so I did. And I, ended up taking that blog post. It in some ways became the table of contents for the book. And then, of course, I got a lot of advice from my editor about ways I could expand and make the book even better than the blog post was. And it really came from, what makes this book slightly different than maybe another book that's more generic about artistic voice is that I was really speaking from my own personal experience. So I started in the introduction just talking about how why finding your voice is so complicated because you can't really find your voice as a writer or an artist, or any other, creative endeavor without being influenced by other creatives, right? Like we get inspired, like we're inspired to write by reading works that we love. We are inspired to make art because by looking at art that we love, that other people have made. And we are sort of always formulating our, our taste and our voice, or what we would love our voice to be. And so, but then you're sort of taking all of these inputs and developing your own sense of who you are. I mean, like the only artists on this planet who are not necessarily influenced are maybe real true outsider artists, like people who live in the middle of nowhere and have these like incredibly creative lives. But most of us live in a world with, we're surrounded by visual stimuli all the time. And so we're filtering it constantly. And so, I start the book about, talking about how it's complicated to sort of figure out who you are, because we're always filtering influence and trying to find our own sort of, stake in the ground. Um, and yeah, that it's in order to make it as an artist, you have to find your own particular style. And that, the real kind of thesis of the book is that we can't get there without practice and failure and practice and failure, and more practice and more failure and feedback and putting things out there and seeing how people respond to them and going back to the drawing board. And it's just this constant cycle of iteration. And to get to that place where we sort of settle into our own orbit in terms of our style, whether it's our writing style or our, visual style, we have to go through a lot of boring stuff, which is just drawing a lot or writing a lot and putting it out into the world. And so, obviously, it's imperative that in that whole experience um, we're experiencing excitement and motivation and inspiration and all the things that are going to keep us going through that process, which can feel really overwhelming sometimes, intimidating, vulnerable, all those things. And so I talk a little bit about kind of how to keep your fire lit while you're learning who you are. And, and a lot of tips for like a lot of sort of practical things you can do to speed up the process of figuring out who you are as an artist. Um, and that book was such a pleasure to write because I was able to sort of marry my own experience doing all of the things I just talked about. And it came from a very authentic place because I had experienced it firsthand, and not even that far in the, you know, um, before the time I wrote the book. Like I wrote this book, after I was an established artist, but because I was late to it, it hadn't been that long. And so it was like really pretty recent experience that I had had, and which made it a really amazing thing to write about because I had enough distance from it to look at it and say, oh, this is what I did and this is how I did it. And I was able to marry that with research on creativity. And I interviewed a ton of other people about how they found their voice and like any kind of experiences or wisdom they had to share around that. So it wasn't just about my experience. I definitely brought in research and the experiences of other people, and got to sort of blend all of those things together, for this book, which now, I think a lot of folks are using in, art schools and things, which makes me enormously happy. So,
No, I think it's amazing. And you just brought up one. There are three things in this book that really stood out to me that I was like, this A fits what I've learned about life and is the kind of advice that is so important for anyone who's trying to find their way, whether it's in art or anywhere else. And the first is one you brought up, which is the importance of practice and persistence and failing and failing and failing. And I so often have people, mostly women, say, and of all ages, I just had someone say this to me who was older, but also especially young people right now, like, I don't want to try something new because I'm going to be bad at it. It's like, well, yeah, you're going to be bad at it until you're good at it. I just
yeah,
started golfing 2 months ago. I'm the worst golfer in the history of golf. I just started. Of course I'm horrible. I just laugh when I hit a bad shot. I'm not, first of all, I'm never going to be Tiger Woods, but second, give me more than 2 months, right? But like, it's constant failure. I mean, the number of times I failed in my life, I can't even count, but that's how you learn, and you just keep getting up. How how do you communicate that? Because I think you do it really nicely in the book, and I know that as a mentor, this is probably something you talk about a lot for women who have been trained. Because I know this isn't something that's just coming individually. There's this training, particularly for ambitious women, that you have to be perfect all the time at everything, and if you're not going to be, don't even try. How do you talk people through that?
Well, I think there's two things. First of all, um, rejecting this idea, of being a perfectionist. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think it's really, truly powerful work if we can do it. I talk a lot in my own teaching about like embracing imperfection and wonkiness, and like ultimately that's what, if every piece of art was sort of quote perfect, then it would all be really boring. Like oftentimes the most interesting work that captures our imaginations or our eye is stuff that's just weird and different, and sort of leaning into that as you develop your style, I think is really important. Um, my friend Alex, who she actually made this banner that's behind me that says "No pain, no gain," which is backwards because I'm
You know what?
on
It's so
video
funny.
right now.
I've been trying to figure out what is Nopa Noga, and now I see the whole thing.
Yeah, no pain, no gain. Sorry. I mentored her when she was in grad school and we became close. But she's now got her own art career, and she makes these t-shirts that say imperfectionist. And I love that
Ooh, I
so
love that.
much because it's like embracing this idea that imperfection is gold, right? And perfection is actually the, what do they say? It's something that ultimately can hold us back, right? And so that's one thing, just embracing imperfection, as not just rejecting perfection, but embracing imperfection, embracing weird, wonky, maybe even questionably finished or not finished, like just embracing the messiness of the process. Um, and then the second thing is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the creative process is is super vulnerable. Like, create the definition of creativity is like that you're making something that's never been made before, and you're, putting it out into the world. And I mean, I guess the putting it out into the world part is questionable whether or not you have to do that. But like, even if you're making something for yourself that you're never going to share with anyone, we all, we judge ourselves. So, there's still like a sense of like internal vulnerability when you're making something and you're not sure that, that you're even going to like it or approve of it. Ira Glass has this, I talk about this in the book a little bit, but he's got this This American Life episode where he talks about the beginner gap. And it's one of my favorite stories. So like the idea is that like when you're an emerging creative person, you have an idea of what you have taste, right? Like we become, it's kind of what I was saying earlier. We become artists and creative people because we enjoy art or writing or some other form of creative expression, and we want to do it ourselves. So we make a picture in our mind of like, I want to make this kind of art, or I want to do this kind of writing, and then we sit down to do it. And because we're a beginner, as you said earlier, like it's going to be terrible. I mean, in very small percentages of cases, you've got, prodigies or people who like are so incredibly talented that, they're making amazing stuff. But that's like, that percentage of the population is so small compared to most of us. Most people have to work for years and years and sort of go through this maze. And I refer to it sometimes as the shark tank, like that you have to go into this sort of uncomfortable place, of mucking around and making mistakes, and before you can get on the other side. And he says that the difference between the people who start on the one side of the shark tank and the people who get over to the other side and sort of end up making work that meets their taste is like going into that uncomfortable space. But most people don't want to go there, so they quit. So most people don't become professional creatives or people who are prolifically creative in some way because they don't want to go into that uncomfortable place. And the number one thing you can do is just get comfortable making shitty work, get comfortable making shitty writing. Like, it's never going to get better unless you practice and kind of go into that space of messing around and experimenting and figuring things out. And I think for me, going back to the conversation we were having earlier about the wisdom of, or the like the beauty of age, is that I understood on a certain level by the time I got started at my career that like I wasn't actually going to get anywhere unless I did that, because I had enough life experience to tell me that. And I do think while a lot of older women in particular are super judgmental of themselves when they start a creative endeavor or an athletic endeavor, whatever, a new endeavor as an a quote older woman, um, they also, if they can let go of that and tap into, the real kind of like grit we have to sort of persevere through uncomfortable feelings. We've been doing it our entire lives. Like just apply that grit to, to your creative endeavor, and like let go of your ego and just allow the creative stuff to happen, and don't judge yourself, and don't worry about what other people are going to think of you while you're on that journey. And yeah, that's sort of like that's my that's my spiel.
No, it's good. And it leads perfectly into, I really loved the interview you did with Libby Black and the conversation about working through your fear. And another thing I think you get with age is you learn to listen to your fear, right? Like I know the fear that's like run away now fear versus the fear of like, this is new and something good you should be doing. And it's exciting, but it's scary, but that's the fear you should follow. But there's so many people who just let fear stop them. And I thought you addressed that really well. So can you talk
Thank
a bit
you.
about working through your fear? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the analogy I give, and there's actually an illustration in the beginning. There's a chapter on fear in Find Your Artistic Voice, and it's like it's about like giving fear a bear hug, and so it's this guy like hugging. I think he's hugging
A
yeah,
cat,
hugging a
because I
big
love it so
bear.
much.
Yeah, thank you. And for me, like, and this was maybe something I learned in therapy years ago, this idea of, and I'm still kind of like, in fact, I had a conversation with my business coach yesterday, who's kind of like my therapist right now. She's amazing. This idea of sort of like uh, accepting and even embracing anxiety and even darkness as information, and information about like how we might make shifts and adjustments in our lives, or things that are, like really digging into why I'm uncomfortable. And as you were saying before, like we have to try to differentiate between good fear and bad fear. And like, not that any fear is good or bad, but more that like, is this something I'm scared to do because I'm afraid I can't do it well? Or is this something that I'm afraid to do because I know it's dangerous? And there is a difference between those two things, and really trying to sort of trust your own intuition about, what it is you're coming up against. And in the creative process, um, rarely are we, you know, in actual physical danger. It's mostly fear of I can't do this, or I shouldn't do this, or I'm not qualified to do this, or what are people going to think about this? And that those are the kinds of things that, ultimately hold us back. And so embracing, like listening to fear, talking to it directly, and befriending it, like really the role of fear is to help us and protect us. It thinks it's protecting us from harm. That's why it's there. Um, but saying to fear, like, I got this, I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
showing up for me. I appreciate that you're here, but I'm going to forge ahead with this anyway, because my gut is telling me this is the direction I really want to go, even though it feels scary and I'm not sure I can do it. And maybe I'm afraid of failure, or I'm afraid of what other people are going to think. So, so that's sort of how I like to think about it. And that's not to say that you will ever be without fear. Like, as Elizabeth Gilbert likes to say, like, I think we'd all be psychopaths if we didn't experience fear, right? Like fear is a
Yeah.
normal
Yeah.
emotion. It serves a really important purpose. Caring about what people think is actually a good thing. It's part of human nature, and it's the part of us that's loving and caring and wants to be seen and loved. And those are all important, good things. But we too often let them get in the way of us really truly expressing ourselves in our, most authentic ways. And I think recognizing that and figuring out ways to move through those fears is really important to like actualizing our creativity.
Well, I think that's right. And your favorite line in the book, or my favorite line of yours in the book, is unfortunate feelings are not going to kill you, or
Yeah,
uncomfortable feelings are not
the
going to
feelings.
kill
Yeah.
you.
Yes,
And I love that. I think if ever there was a line that we should just like plaster on all of our foreheads, that's it. And for me, I felt like it summed up really both of these books and sort of, everything we're talking about, which is like, you're going to be uncomfortable, you're going to be scared and embarrassed or shy or whatever. You're not going to die. You're going to be better when you come out on the other side.
that's right.
And
Yes,
you'll come
very
out on
well
the other
said.
side knowing who you are.
Yeah, very well said.
I love that. So, one thing I wanted to talk about before we close, you you feature this artist, this ceramics artist, Ayumi Hori, in your book. Who not only does beautiful work, I googled her. She does really, really beautiful work, but also she has found this really wonderful way of using her art to as activism,
Mhm.
which I thought was really cool. And I thought in the moment that we're in now, I'd love to have a conversation about your perspective on using art as activism.
Yeah, it's something that I also lean into pretty heavily. I feel so lucky in the time we live in. Um, People, at least most people in my life, want to do something to make a difference in the world. They might wake up feeling like we're living in some kind of dumpster fire. Um, but they don't know what to do about it. Like they feel like they have no agency and no way to help besides maybe donating money to a cause, which is, by the way, amazing. And I feel so lucky that I have this way to and I know that Ayumi feels this way too. Like I have this thing that I can do that where, through which I can express my opinions about things. I can advocate for vulnerable people. Um, I can raise money. I have this like talent that I can use that makes me feel like I have some agency and I have a platform to do it. And I don't take that for granted. Like that feels so incredibly important to me right now and has ever since, my work became more political. And I mean that's one thing that I've sort of bonded with Ayumi about was just like this ability that we have to use our creativity to be a change agent in the world and how important that feels because so many people don't necessarily have that privilege and and I really encourage people who do have the means and the talent to use their art for change. I mean, I do believe all art is political in some way, even in what you choose maybe not to say, um, versus what you choose to say. Um, but really to be explicit about it in this time feels really important to me. And fortunately, I think we're living in a time where more and more artists are recognizing that and using the internet to do that. And there, of course, are other ways offline that many people are doing it as well.
Well, and as someone who runs a nonprofit, I mean, over the years, we've had people, make videos for us and design shirts and jewelry and whatever that they've sold the proceeds to. And for a lot of my friends have had people who have used their art to support their organizations. I've one of my dear friends runs an organization called Warm Cookies of the Revolution, which is,
Mm,
first of all, the greatest name ever. Second, you can tell he's an artist. And he uses art and performance to teach people civics in these like incredible ways. Like there's so many different ways that you can use your art. And so I love that I saw the work that you've done. I love that you featured Ayumi, especially because I think when you think about ceramics, it feels like something that is like the least political thing on earth, right?
Like utilitarian, right? Exactly.
Right, like she's making bowls, but she's done a lot with it. So I really, really want to talk about that. Lisa, I cannot thank you enough. I'm going to be buying so many copies of A Glorious Freedom. I'm really obsessed with it. Your art is so cool. I will have linked. Look, I am not good enough at the internet to know where the linking goes versus the video, but look somewhere around and there will be text. If you're on YouTube, it's in the little more thing. That will have your website and obviously these books linked, but also I'm going to find these Imperfectionist t-shirts and some other things I'm on there. I was really inspired by all of this and was so excited to have you on. And thank you. This has been a really, really, I've learned so much in the last hour. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're an absolute delight. And actually one of the best interviews I've ever had. And I've done a lot of interviews. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that Lisa inspired you to think about adding a little art into your life this year, or maybe doing a full-blown do-over or anything in between. Please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the things, and share this with someone you think may find inspiration as well. And I'll see you in the next episode.